If you will, stand with us. It's great to be in the house of the Lord tonight. You came down from heaven's throne. This earth you formed was not your home. A love like this the world had never known. A crown of thorns to mock your name. Forgiveness fell upon your face. A love like this the world had never known. On the altar of our praise, let there be no higher name. Jesus, Son of God, you laid down your perfect life. You are the sacrifice. Jesus, Son of God, you are Jesus, Son of God.
You took our sin, you bore our shame, you rose to life, you defeated the grave. A love like this the world has never known.
'Cause you took our sin, you bore our shame, you rose to life, you defeated the grave. A love like this the world has never known. On the altar of our praise, let there be no higher name. Jesus, Son of God, you laid down your perfect life. You are the sacrifice. Jesus, Son of God, you are Jesus, Son of God. Be lifted higher than all you've overcome. Your name be louder than any other song. There is no power that can come against your love. The cross was enough. The cross was enough. The cross was enough. The cross was enough. On the altar of our praise, let there be no higher name. Jesus, Son of God, you laid down your perfect life. You are the sacrifice. Jesus, Son of God, you are Jesus, Son of God. You can be seated.
Thank you, Pastor Jim. Hand that mic over to Courtney. Excellent. Courtney, tell us all about it.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Courtney Faulkner, and I'm announcing this for our college and career ladies and up. This is our Christmas celebration. It's going to be Thursday, December 8th, and you will be getting your invitations tonight, starting tonight, and if you don't get it tonight, you'll probably get it on Sunday morning. It's from 6 to 8 p.m. here in the Fellowship Hall. It will be a $10 due by December 5th. That's the deadline to RSVP and pay your $10. It's going to be catered by JW Steakhouse, and we're asking that you bring one wrapped $7 ornament. If you have any questions, you can see me or Beth Weddington. Is Beth in here? I don't think she's in here. Okay. If you
She's
don't-
teaching 56ers
Okay,
upstairs.
okay. So Beth Weddington is here tonight. If you see her, you can give her the money, or you can give me the money. So that's
Excellent,
it. Thank
excellent.
you.
Give that to Pastor Jim, if you will. Thank you so much, Courtney. It still had that kind of reverb effect on the mic, so Courtney was up here sounding angelic as she's giving her announcement. It's kind of vibrating through our ears, and so, what's that? Okay. Well, hey, couple of quick things. That's her husband. Good job, man. Good job. Good winning points there. Hey, we got some books down here. If you're new and you haven't done Proverbs with us, we got some Proverbs books. These are $4, and we have some free books on Sundays as we go through, our series on Sunday. But on Wednesday, we charge you for them, and so Sundays the books are over here. Prayer list down here. So grab a prayer sheet if you don't follow those online and you don't see our prayer requests online. Sign up for the Christmas parade. You can sign your kids up and your teens up. So kids and teens can be Charlie Brown characters for the Christmas parade. So sign them up for that if that's something that they want to do. And if you need a place to serve, this lady down here, one of the birthday girls, Jennifer Marquette, would love to hear from you because she's got a spot for you on the greeters. You can serve with our greeters. You can serve on our coffee team. And a handful of folks have stepped up and said they will do that. And so Jennifer says she's still got some more space. She would love for you to join her in that regard. So please let her know about that. This Sunday, Name Tag Sunday, we'll have the name tags spread around so you can put them on. Also, we continue in our James series. And then back to Jennifer Marquette, because after church Sunday, you want a place to serve, even temporarily. Help us, especially men, help us go upstairs and bring down this Sunday after church. Just spend a few minutes. If all of us did it, just be a few minutes and bring down some Christmas decorations from upstairs and put them all over the floor and the stage. And then there's a crew of folks who are going to be decorating, getting things ready for Christmas. It's exciting. No Wednesday programs next week. So we had our Thanksgiving meal today. How many people enjoyed the Thanksgiving? Our Thanksgiving feast. And so usually I'd say a Net's Kitchen. So it was half a Net's Kitchen today and half your kitchen today. So we all brought some stuff and feasted together, potluck style. And so it was great. Thanks for joining us in there. And so since we had our Thanksgiving tonight, a lot of you guys are going to be traveling and spending time with family and others next week. So no programs next Wednesday. So tonight we continue in this series, our series on Wednesdays, Proverbs, Wisdom for Life. And so regarding chapter 5 and many other parts of the Bible, I want to read to you. I like how one commentator put it. He said, "The Bible does not hide from or obscure the power of the temptation to illicit sex. In language that is refreshingly clear and direct without itself indulging in titillation, the text warns the reader of the debacle that awaits him should he succumb in this area, and at the same time promises profound sexual joy to those whose hearts are chaste and loving." And so if the church is to do its duty, it must be no less clear in its teaching. To assume that nice Christian young people especially do not struggle in these areas, or to speak only in whispers and innuendo on the grounds that they are inappropriate for the Christian pulpit, is no less than gross neglect of duty on the church's part. So whether one is dealing with the ritual prostitution of a fertility cult, or the ordinary prostitution on the street, or the simple lure of extramarital sex, the temptations and dangers are the same. End quote on that one. And this guy speaks truth. God's Word has a lot to say about sexual topics, a lot to say. And the comments I just read are very true. And so we should read it. Number one, as Christ followers, we should read it. And we should, number two, discuss these things, especially with our family members, with our spouses and our kids. We talked about family devotions. I hope you're doing that. Discuss these topics with your family and do it, in maturity and with strategy. And so do it without crassness, or as the commentator talked about, nothing, titillating, but without being crass, but at the same time, without any shame. We can talk about sexual topics, especially as God's Word addresses them. And so I know on Monday nights, we have an array of men that meet with me, and men's host that host even tonight. And so we've got some younger ones, some older men in there, and we don't stay away from any topics, especially as it's in God's Word, including relational topics, sexual topics. And so pastors and teachers and youth pastors should cover these topics from the pulpit. And you know that when the Bible lends itself to it, we do here. Pastor Josh does it upstairs. He, with young people, as he's got 5th through 12th technically under his per view. He, at least once a year, usually in February, as is around, Valentine's Day, he will do a whole series every single year to talk about sexual topics and what the Word says about things. So we don't shy away from it, nor should we. And so parents should be reading God's Word and discussing the precepts with their children, just as Solomon here is talking to his sons. Young adults, he's talking to his young adults, and he's going to delve deep into sexual issues. So, Pastor, what age group is appropriate to talk about these things with, to be outright and blunt about God's Word? Well, so be sensitive with it. You've heard that Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs wouldn't be read to the Jews until they were 13. That's actually untrue. I can't find any evidence. That's just a misnomer. Like, this is a myth, really. Even from younger years, they will quote parts of that book. But there's parts of God's Word that we still need to be sensitive with them. For instance, Galatians 5:19 in this church, when we talked about sexual immorality just weeks ago, at that point we allowed 56ers to join JAM, even though JAM goes up through 4th. And so some parents, not all, but some parents chose to allow their 56ers to be in there as we got into some stuff, God's Word about sexual immorality. And then even when you're dealing with it with your kids and your families, I know that Amy and I, as we're doing family devotions, and I've told you, I think before, that we're currently in Genesis. And so with Genesis 38, Judah and Tamar, guess what? Me and Amy and Hannah, 12, going on 13, we read that and talked about that. And that one is the first chapter, I think, ever, where I just said that I didn't even try to clean it up or paraphrase it for my younger boys. That chapter was an aside anyhow, before it goes down the Joseph narrative at the end of Genesis. And so I was sensitive with my boys 6 and 3, not counting the baby. And so we didn't talk about that very chapter with them. But I'll tell you, in chapter 39, we just recently did this one, Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And so as I'm reading it, and then I'm talking to the boys about it, and I say to the boys, well, Potiphar's wife was really wanting Joseph, a man not her husband, to come up and, hug and kiss her and love on her. But then, of course, we read it outright for what it was with even Hannah. So be sensitive and not crass, and talk about these things even with younger folks. I know that my boys and Hannah and the boys, all of them, are going to grow up, and we as parents especially are going to talk to them about sexual issues, basing it on God's Word. And so they've got to be ready and primed for that. They've got to know that this isn't taboo. This is stuff that we talk about because God's Word talks about it. And so it's not to be ashamed to talk about these things. It's not to be embarrassing or silly or funny. No, it's important stuff. And so we talk about it. And so even now, in a sensitive way, even with the younger ones, we're talking about sexual issues. And so as adults, we're young adults and then older adults in here tonight. So obviously in maturity, without crassness, we can handle these discussions. So let's look at chapter 5, verse 1. My son, be attentive to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips, he's like talking about your lips guarding knowledge. He's like, the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey. And forbidden woman here is a prostitute or any woman who is not his wife. He's like, my son, anybody who's not in covenant relationship with you in a marriage, that's the forbidden woman. And her lips are going to drip honey. Her speech is smoother than oil. And we've already talked about this in this very series in Proverbs, how we've discussed before that words are the beginning, almost always, are the beginning of sexual infidelity. A man is easily flattered by words. A woman wants a man saying all the right things and expressing love and whispering sweet nothings in the ear. I mean, words do it more so, and it brings infidelity more so than just the looks and physical attraction. Certainly lust is a part of it. Certainly lust and physical attraction plays a part in sexual connections that are outside of marriage. But let us not forsake the power of words as the general root and starting point, usually, in most situations, in most occasions. And so this is the second time. And in the next chapter that we won't get to today, he's going to talk about the physical. A woman batting her eyes, her eyelashes, and trying to look physically appealing to the one that she's trying to lure into adultery. Here, though, he gets right to the words. The lips of a forbidden woman drip honey. Her speech is smoother than oil. So he's saying, my son, you got some ladies who are going to who are going to say the right words to you. Now, if you could flip this is for men and women. Ladies, there's some men who will say the right words to you, who will say what you want them to say and what you want and feel like you need to hear. And so infidelity can start, as it often does, with words. It says, her feet go down to death, her steps follow the path to Sheol. That's the grave. So sex and romance outside of marriage is costly. It's fatal. She does not ponder the path of life, and her ways wander, and she doesn't even know it. So she's thinking about the sexual allure, the words of this man, and he's thinking about her words, and they're thinking lustfully about one another. They're not thinking about the consequences. And look at verse 7. And now, O sons, listen to me. Do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the merciless, and lest strangers take their fill of your strength and your labors go to the house of a foreigner. Now, all four of those last descriptions in the Hebrew are masculine from verses 9 to 10. They're masculine. They don't refer to the adulteress herself. The others, the merciless, the strangers, the foreigner, they're all talking about somebody else. There are a handful of possible interpretations. Number one, and all of these are doable. I think the author here is trying to make a point that all of these can come into play. Number one, the woman could be a prostitute. And so the man that is talking about who's going to take advantage and take the money and the stranger who's going to have his fill, that man is her agent. He feeds on her victims. He takes the money and the honor, and years of their labor is wasted. He takes it. Number two, the woman is a mistress, and strangers are the merchants and other men, perhaps, who profit from her easy access to the money of her lover, who's not her husband. She's sleeping with some guy who's not her husband and has access to his money, and she spends it, and so his money is going to strangers and even foreigners. Thirdly, the woman is a married adulteress, and the other is her outraged husband. These men who are upset here could be her husbands, who will prosecute even. They will seek a fine or seek the death penalty for the adulterer, the man in the situation, the adultering man. Number four, the adulteress is a foreign woman, non-Israelite, and the adulterer here is giving away money to non-God servers. And so in two ways, he's breaching covenant. He's breaching a covenant with his own purity and his own wife, even if he doesn't have one, breaching it with his future wife and doing this with a mistress. And then he's breaching the covenant between, he's getting with a non-God server. Number five, the woman is a cult prostitute, and the strangers are the priests that prey on the victims, kind of like the pimp or the agent in the first one that we mentioned. All of these are doable. In fact, there were cult prostitutes. That was big time back then. And so that one really comes into play here. One commentator put it this way: each of these possibilities has merit. None can be proven to be the sole explanation. The passage uses general language to make the point that adultery leads to personal degeneration and financial depletion. So look at verse 11. It says, at the end of your life you groan, when your flesh and body are consumed, and you say, how I hated discipline, and my heart despised reproof. I did not listen to the voice of my teachers or incline my ear to my instructors. I am at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. This could refer to a number of things. In other words, legal proceedings against the adulterer are taking place, and he's at utter ruin. Or there's a loss of money that he's used and wasted money on prostitutes, or he's had public disgrace and humiliation because of his extramarital, activities. And so he's at utter ruin because he didn't listen to the wise, the wisdom that was given to him even from the young age. He declined it. He didn't hold on to wisdom. And so what it's going to get into in this next section, beginning with verse 15, is that romantic passions and sexual relations should be with the man's wife. And for women, it should be with your husband. It should be in a marital relationship. Look at verse 15. Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Now this is, the cistern and well are the wife's affections. Point blank, that's what that is. Don't try to make more of that, especially as we talk about the men. There's springs and streams. A lot of folks have tried to make more of that than what it is in point blank. Look at verse 16. Should your springs be scattered abroad? Should your streams of water be in the streets? That is talking about the man's affection for his wife. So, and he's using a water analogy for both. The wife cisterns and well. I mean, she brings a refreshing to her husband. The husband's springs and streams are for his wife. Why should they be scattered elsewhere? Look at verse 17. Let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. So don't share what is meant for you and your spouse. This goes out to men and women. Let the refreshing be between you and your wife or you and your husband. It's not for sharing. It's not for opening up and you going elsewhere, or she going elsewhere, or you both going elsewhere, or any of that. It's to be kept holy and keeping the marriage bed pure, and you together share one another. It says, "Let your fountain be blessed." Again, back to the his affections are springs and streams of water. This is not a crass allusion here. This is just point blank saying, "You will be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth." Some translations say, "Take pleasure in your first wife." That also hits the point. What he's saying here, whether you're married to someone now who's a young wife or an older wife, who knows how long you've been married, the point is there should be no others. You're going to be refreshing your wife, she's refreshing you, and you both belong to one another. So the blessed fountain here says, let your fountain be blessed. That blessed fountain, that rejoicing that he's talking about here, is not about having children, although elsewhere in God's Word you see that children are a blessing, and they talk about that profusely, especially in the Old Testament, about the blessing of children. But here it's not about children at all. The passage is strictly emphasizing sexual pleasure between the two, between men and women, the husband and wife. And the text is going to prove it as we keep reading. He says, "Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth." So again, just her only. "A lovely deer, a graceful doe, let her breast fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love." And he means this literally, and he's talking about sexual passions and sexual pleasure. And he says, "Be intoxicated always in her love." And that word in the Hebrew, intoxicated, he's going to use that 3 times in this very chapter. And that word means to be led astray. Usually it's a negative. Here, in this one and the next time we see it here is going to be positive. He says, be led astray. In other words, be captivated, be swept away. Be drunk in love with your wife in a good way, and wives with your husband. Be swept away in wanting to be with them, your spouse. That's what he's talking about here when he says be intoxicated always with her love. Now, why should you be intoxicated, led astray? And now it kind of hints to the negative. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? Again, he's talking about sexual pleasures. Why seek pleasure sexually from a woman who is not your wife? For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord. And so this before we go any further, this intoxication, he says, be swept away. Use it in the positive. Be swept away with the love of your wife. Don't be swept away and led astray by seeking sexual gratification with someone who's not your wife. Know that God means and has always meant for sex to be enjoyed. It's to be pleasurable. Yes, it's for procreation. But a lot of times the church and Christians like to say that that's the only. Clearly no. Clearly no. Sex is way more. God intended it for way more than just the blessing of children and procreation. God's Word doesn't shy away from promoting it for pleasure. The two will become one flesh, says the Old and New Testament. A husband and wife should not deprive each other of sex, says Paul, the apostle, in 1 Corinthians 7. If you look at that chapter, he says several things. He says, he's not even talking about for procreative. He's like, the husband and wife don't deprive each other sexually. He says they even have a physical right to each other's body. He says the husband's body is not his alone, it belongs to his wife. The wife's body is not hers alone, it belongs to the husband. And they should come to each other, again, for pleasure as they refresh one another. So sexual regularity, he says, Paul does in 1 Corinthians 7, helps them both avoid falling prey to the temptation of sexual immorality. Again, says Paul in chapter 7. And he says, one thing further that Paul says, if they mutually agree not to have sex, it shouldn't be for a long period, again, to keep either one of them away from going down a dark road. He says it this way, so that Satan cannot tempt them. So he's talking about husbands and wives coming together for sexual pleasure. God made it for that purpose. That's one of the purposes. aside from the procreative purposes. He wants husbands and wives to enjoy each other and to, again, the wife is the cistern and he's the spring, and both enjoy and refresh one another. And yet, again, if you still are not convinced, and I'm sure you are, but if you're not convinced that God made sex for the pleasure between a husband and wife, then the same author of this, Song of Solomon, he wrote Song of Solomon, he wrote, we call it Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, and so it makes it dramatically clear that sex within marriage is to be enjoyed. It is a gift from God. Now, we're not going to get into that. You can read that later on if you haven't already. But if you read even that book, you will see that it's to be very pleasurable between a husband and a wife. They both parties in that book talk about the pleasure from their intimacy and romance, even sexually, with their spouse. So in verse 21, for a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all of his paths. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he is held fast in the cords of his sin. So God sees what's going on. He sees even if you feel like you can fool your wife or your husband and you can seek pleasure elsewhere outside of the holy, the marriage bed. God is aware, and the iniquities that you sow unto yourself, they will come back to haunt you. They will ensnare you. And he is held fast to the cords of his sin. He in this instance, if he goes after a prostitute, he is the one creating the very cords that will bond him and torture him and hurt him and others in life by looking for sexual pleasure outside of marriage. And then verse 23, he dies for lack of discipline. He knows what to do, but he's not disciplined to do it. He doesn't, again, follow the wisdom that he knows to follow. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is led astray. That same word again, interpreted led astray, but it's the same Hebrew word that says don't be intoxicated. Be led astray by your wife. Don't be intoxicated or led astray by someone not your spouse. Here it says if you go down the dark road, you will die, and that could be literal or figurative in any number of ways. You're going to suffer harm. You will not be blessed, you'll be cursed. But then, because of your great foolishness and not being disciplined in what you know to do, you will be led astray. And here, it's certainly the negative kind of leading astray. And so the next two chapters will continue to talk about sexual topics, especially keeping away from adultery and keeping away from premarital sex. And so chapter 6, verses 20 through 35, we'll talk about it. And then all of chapter 7 we'll talk about it. Now, we're going to skip next week because we're not meeting next week as it's Thanksgiving week. And so we'll likely come back 2 weeks from today and focus on the first half of chapter 6 that is not sexual in content. And then 2 weeks from today, we'll have to pick it back up. And we'll probably glaze over a little bit of that sexual component of chapter 6 and then really get into it in chapter 7. It's all about it. And so we'll have to cover these sexual topics yet again. And he goes deeper. He talks about more than just the words, but he talks about some lust issues. And he goes deeper in the warning of staying away from any sex outside of a marriage relationship. And so we'll get to that in another couple of weeks. So I hope I left you enough time to spend a few minutes with your groups, and then before you leave, have some prayer. I need let's see, how about this? Michelle, at least stand up for us, and Chaz, stand up. If you're brand new here, and some of you are, and so ladies, if you want to know where you can go, I want you to come and just see Michelle down front, and she'll show you there's a number of ladies groups. You can just be with a group for a few minutes. And guys, you want to know where to go, Chaz will direct you to one or more groups that you could choose from. And so be with us for the next few minutes. You're dismissed. Thanks, y'all.